Rachel, put on your glasses as soon as you get out of there.
I did.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel. Well, Donald Trump has a 54% disapproval rating in the latest NBC News poll. And at the end of the hour, we're going to show you the president's disapproval rating state by state, which shows that at this point, the president has virtually no path to coming close to winning the Electoral College in his reelection campaign, as of now. Disapproval of the president comes in two forms, and some of them sometimes at the same time. One is disapproval of the president's policies. The other is disapproval of the person. And disapproval of the person cannot be changed by changing policy. Here is the person that a clear majority of American voters disapprove of.
I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
That was about 3 years ago. Here's that same person today.
He called over his people. He's got 10 people standing behind him. Everyone is central casting. Central casting. Glasses.
That's your president. That's the president of the United States, the guy who thinks wearing glasses is funny. This is the kind of Trump news that is never emphasized enough, and in any other presidency would be explosive news. It doesn't just demonstrate presidential stupidity. It demonstrates serious neurological misfires for the president. The president has no functioning inhibitor in his brain that can control an impulse that was supposed to disappear early in elementary school. It also shows the president's neurological incapacity to express himself with words and sentences. Listen to what the president said next.
He reported within 2 minutes, explained basketball players, bomb. And I said,
those two sounds that the president made after the words basketball players have meaning only to the president. He was trying to communicate with all of us and with the world. And he just ran out of words. He substituted noises for words and thought that he completed the sentence, thought he completed the thought clearly for us with the noises boom, boom, whatever that means. We have never seen public displays of brain dysfunction like this in a president of the United States. And it is the one elected office in the country where you really have to worry about this kind of thing. It wouldn't be such a big deal in a governor or a mayor or even a senator, but the president of the United States has the nuclear codes. And this president of the United States is going to sit down with a North Korean dictator who also has nuclear codes and has probably just seen that the president of the United States makes fun of people like him who wear glasses. Here's something Donald Trump doesn't know. As I just told Rachel, 60% of us wear glasses or some kind of eye assist, contact lenses. 60% of Americans, 60% of voters were made fun of today by the president of the United States. That's how Donald Trump began a week that could be one of the worst weeks of his presidency, making fun of 60% of American voters. Maybe that can actually push up the number of voters who say they will never, under any circumstances, vote for Donald Trump's reelection. Currently, 57% of voters say they will never vote to reelect Donald Trump. Only Donald Trump could find a way to push that number up. Tonight, President Trump is flying across the Pacific to another meeting with North Korea's dictator, Kim Jong-un. The president is doing everything he can to make this week's headlines focus on his meeting with the North Korean dictator, but Washington will not allow that to happen. Even the slightest public development in Robert Mueller's investigation of the president would be enough to turn away from coverage of the president's trip. And Michael Cohen's public testimony on Wednesday about crimes he says he committed with Donald Trump at the direction of presidential candidate Donald Trump in order to win the presidency will prove impossible to contain for President Trump and his allies trying to keep that focus on North Korea. And tomorrow, the House of Representatives will hold an historic vote, a vote of disapproval of the President of the United States and his declaration of national emergency to take money away from other government purposes to build a wall on the southern border that Congress has decided not to build. The resolution already has enough co-sponsors in the House to pass. What we will be watching for tomorrow is how many Republicans vote for it. The resolution was introduced in the House of Representatives by the Democrats on Friday. Every member has had the entire weekend to read it and study it. Every member of the House will have had the resolution for 5 days when they finally vote on it tomorrow. But Republican Congressman Tom Cole got the orders today to say that that's not enough time.
We are on short notice reviewing a bill to disapprove of the president's emergency declaration for the southern border. I do not understand the haste with which the majority is pushing this disapproval resolution through. We've had no time to review the bill, and no committee has held a hearing or marked it up.
We've had no time to review the bill. Okay, here it is. Let's review it. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled that pursuant to Section 202 of the National Emergencies Act, 50 U.S.C. 1622, the national emergency declared by the finding of the President on February 15, 2019 in Proclamation 9844, 84 Federal Register 4949 is hereby terminated. How long did that take? Control room says 22 seconds. That took 22 seconds. Now, some of those words might have sounded unfamiliar to your ear, but certainly not to a member of Congress. And the only legally relevant words in the resolution are the national emergency declared by the finding of the President on February 15, 2019 is hereby terminated. If there is a member of Congress who needs more than 1 minute to read and reread and reread this resolution and understand exactly what this resolution does, then that person is unfit to serve in the House of Representatives. And Congressman Tom Cole knows that. He was just the poor member of the leadership today who was forced to make the public statement today that Republicans don't have enough time to read this. After the resolution of disapproval passes the House of Representatives, which it will, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell will be required to bring it to a vote in the Senate within 18 days. Senate Democrats will need at least 4 Republicans to vote with them to pass the resolution. So far, there are 3 Republicans who say they will vote with the Democrats. Senator Thom Tillis, whose op-ed in the Washington Post says, I support Trump's vision on border security, but I would vote against the emergency. Senator Susan Collins said, if it's a clean disapproval resolution, I will support it. And Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski said this.
I think it's so important that there be clear lines when it comes to the separation of powers, the institution of the Congress as that appropriating branch. I want to make sure that what, in fact, we are voting on when it comes to the Senate is what I believe it is. If it's what I have seen right now, I will support the resolution to disapprove.
58 former senior government officials have signed onto a joint bipartisan statement saying, quote, in our professional opinion, there is no factual basis for the declaration of a national emergency for the purpose of circumventing the appropriations process and reprogramming billions of dollars in funding to construct a wall at the southern border. The co-signers of that statement include former Secretaries of State John Kerry and Madeleine Albright, former Director of Central Intelligence Agency John Brennan, former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, former Defense Secretary and former Director of the CIA Leon Panetta, and former Ambassador to the United Nations Samantha Power, and former Undersecretary of State Wendy Sherman. 26 former Republican members of Congress signed a letter calling on the current Republican members of Congress to, quote, honor your oath and protect the Constitution. The letter says, it has always been a Republican fundamental principle that no matter how strong our policy preferences, no matter how deep our loyalties to presidents or party leaders, in order to remain a constitutional republic, we must act within the borders of the Constitution. The Republican co-signers of this letter include former Republican Senators John Danforth, Gordon Humphrey, and Olympia Snowe. Leading off our discussion now, former Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who is a fellow now at the Institute of Politics at Harvard, and she was the first woman elected to the United States Senate from North Dakota. Also joining us, Adam Jentleson, former Deputy Chief of Staff to Senator Harry Reid. He's now the Director of Public Affairs for Democracy Forward. And Jason Johnson is with us. He's the politics editor at TheRoot.com, a professor of political science at Morgan State University. He's also an MSNBC political analyst. And Senator Heitkamp, I don't know how long it takes you to study resolutions that I can read in 22 seconds. But poor Tom Cole in the House of Representatives being handed the job today of saying the Republicans do not have enough time to read this resolution that takes me 22 seconds to read.
Well, I think you said it right. Tom knows better, and he's really a great guy, and I've worked with him on a lot of Native American issues. But, you know, what I was thinking about as you were reading it was all the handwritten notes that were on that tax bill at 2:30 in the morning when we were handed it and told we're going to vote in the next half an hour. So if you want an example of where you don't have enough time, that tax bill, which is now proving to be a disaster, I think, for the president, that's a great example of where it didn't work so well. But that resolution, there's no reason not to take the vote. What's really interesting to me is the level of hypocrisy that we're going to see from people like Mike Lee or from Tom Cruise or from Ted Cruz, who stood up many times and accused Obama of usurping legislative authority. Where are they going to land on this when they know clearly that this is in excess of executive power?
Adam Jentleson, where are they going to land?
It's a really great question. I think what you're going to be looking for two things when the Senate eventually votes. First is, does it have enough votes to pass the Senate, which is a majority vote? This rules attached to this special resolution allow it to bypass the Senate's 60-vote threshold. So, does it pass? That's 51 votes. I think the answer to that is probably yes. But then the question is, that would send it to Trump's desk. If he vetoes it, it goes back to the Senate and the House. And then the question is, will it get the 2/3 vote necessary to override the president's veto? So that would be 67 votes in the Senate. So I think what's really going to be interesting looking at how votes fall in the Senate is, where are you between 51 and 67? Do you start to approach the 67-vote threshold? Because that could be really interesting territory.
And Jason Johnson, this is also being challenged in court, and so there could conceivably be an injunction against it somewhere in one of the district courts that's being challenged in, even before you get to the 18 days in the Senate, whenever Mitch McConnell brings this up.
Right. I mean, Lawrence, legally, this is going to be really complicated. And remember, President Trump himself has somehow strangely predicted that this is going to end up at the Supreme Court and that the Supreme Court will give him this authority. So I think we're not even in the first quarter. Like, we literally just came out of the locker room right now as to how this process with this sort of emergency call is going to go. I do think it's going to make it through the House. I do think it's going to make it through the Senate. I do think the President of the United States will veto it. I don't think that Congress is going to have enough votes to overturn that veto, and then we're going to be in a long and complicated court process. And I hope everyone watching recognizes that, look, calling your senators, calling your House of Representatives members, that's important right now. But also, this is why voting matters, because all these lower-level courts and all the appointments that are made by this administration is one of the reasons why he could potentially get away with this kind of policy down the road.
Let's listen to what Republican Senator Roy Blunt said about this yesterday.
I think we're going to have to evaluate whether this is really the intention of an emergency. Is it really an emergency if, again, the president asked the Congress to do it and they failed to? That's different than the way this law has been used in the past.
So you could vote to try to block the president from moving forward with this emergency. You just haven't decided yet. Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
Senator Heitkamp, my guess is that a senator like Roy Blunt represents, there's probably a dozen Republican senators who are sitting exactly where he is right now, looking at it exactly the same way he is, which means on the fence, could go either way on this.
Well, I think there's a tremendous number of these folks who are going to have to do some soul searching on the statements that they made when President Obama declared DACA, and they screamed bloody murder on the floor of the Senate about how inappropriate it was for a president to do that. I think that there's a whole lot of soul searching that's going on right now, and I think it's deeper than what you think. I think it goes to really the core of of who they are as United States senators. And, you know, it may not be enough to overturn a veto, but I think there is great discomfort. And this is the bargain that Mitch made with the president to open up government. And I don't even think Mitch McConnell, on a good day, wants to see this emergency power exercised the way the president exercised it.
The president seems nervous about Republican senators on this. He tweeted, "I hope our great Republican senators don't get led down the path of weak and ineffective border security. Without strong borders, we don't have a country, and the voters are on board with us. Be strong and smart. Don't fall into the Democrats' trap of open borders and crime." And Adam, that's the best he can do in trying to hold Republican senators for his emergency declaration.
Yeah, and I think he should be worried. I mean, look, right now the senators who said they're going to vote to support it are folks like Collins, Tillerson, Murkowski, folks who are facing tough re-elections in 2020 and probably need to demonstrate a little bit of independence from the president to win in their tough states. But when you have someone like Senator Blunt talking about possibly voting for it, then that raises the possibility of what we used to call a jailbreak, when you just completely lose control of the caucus, and that's when you start talking about 67 votes actually being a possibility. And I think there's a possibility of that happening here. I think the president is right to be nervous.
Yeah, that's exactly why I was focusing on Senator Blunt, because, Jason, as Adam says, you look at key senators on each side. Sometimes there's a small group, 2 or 3 that are possible to go across the aisle. But then there are the situations where, you know, if this one goes, a dozen goes or more. And that's what we could see that here.
Right. Well, we saw that with sort of reopening the government. Look, I am, like most of us, we've learned not to necessarily trust Susan Collins. She's very loosey in the football. We saw that with Brett Kavanaugh. She'll say one thing and vote another way. But the reality is, look, nobody wants to be the 51st vote. But many people are perfectly happy to be 56 or 57, right? Like, if you can get a whole slew of people who say, then you've got cover, then no one has to worry about it. So that is a possibility. And the truth of the matter is, look, if I'm a Republican right now and I have a concern about this president being able to declare emergency, I don't want this to get to a second vote. I want to have such a large number of voters come out, so many Republicans vote in this first round, that the president won't think about vetoing it, and then we can negotiate in another way. I don't think anyone wants to have to go through this process in another 18 or 20 days and then have to corral 5 or 6 more people. Just get it done now, and then they can cover themselves.
Senator Heitkamp, quickly before we go, if Mitch McConnell stretches this out the 18 days, as we would expect him to, would he be hoping during that time, secretly hoping, that there is a court injunction against the emergency declaration somewhere, so that then he might be able to just let senators go on this and vote any way they want?
I think the clear answer to that is yep. And I also don't think that this is just a political calculation on Republican senators. I think this is a clear vote about what does it mean to be a legislator? What does it mean to protect the institution of the United States Senate? What is Pat Roberts doing? He's going to retire. I mean, this is going to be a very, very difficult vote for the president if this vote's taken.
I want Senator Heitkamp with me whenever we're counting votes in the Senate from now on. Thank you, Senator Heitkamp, for your invaluable perspective on this. Jason Johnson, Adam Jentleson, thank you for starting us off tonight.